Hello everyone and welcome to another episode of Radiant Clues. Today, we're going to tell you how a plane with no fuel managed to glide over the Atlantic Ocean and land safely, saving the lives of 306 people on board. This is the story of Air Transat Flight 236, one of the most incredible feats of flying ever recorded. Stay tuned to find out how it happened. And don't forget to hit the subscribe button and the bell icon to get notified of our future videos. Air Transat Flight 236 was a transatlantic flight bound for Lisbon, Portugal, from Toronto, Canada, on August 24, 2001. The aircraft was a 2-year-old Airbus A330-243 with 293 passengers and 13 crew members on board. The flight was flown by Captain Robert Pish, an experienced glider pilot, and First Officer Dirk de Jager. The flight took off from Toronto at 0:52 Universal Time Coordinated and was expected to arrive in Lisbon at 8:30 Universal Time Coordinated. Everything seemed normal until about 4 hours into the flight, when the pilots noticed some strange readings on their instruments. The right engine was showing low oil temperature and high oil pressure, which usually indicate a faulty sensor. The pilots contacted their maintenance base in Montreal, but they were told that it was not a serious problem and that they could continue their flight. However, soon after, they received another warning, a fuel imbalance between the left and right tanks. This meant that one tank had more fuel than the other, which could affect the stability and performance of the aircraft. The pilots decided to transfer some fuel from the left tank to the right tank to balance the situation. But what they didn't know was that they had a major fuel leak in the right engine. A fracture had developed in a fuel line due to improper maintenance, and it was spilling fuel at a rate of about 1 liter per second. By transferring fuel from the left tank to the right tank, they were actually feeding the leak and losing more fuel. The leak went unnoticed for about an hour, until the pilots received another warning, a low fuel level in both tanks. They checked their fuel gauges and realized that they had only about 8 tons of fuel left, which was not enough to reach their destination. They immediately declared a fuel emergency and requested permission to divert to Lodges Airport in the Azores Islands, which was about 150 kilometers away. They also started to descend from their cruising altitude of 39,000 feet to save fuel. But as they were descending, they heard a loud bang from the right engine. It had flamed out due to lack of fuel. The pilots tried to restart it, but it was too late. They had lost one engine and half of their electrical power. They continued to fly with one engine, hoping to make it to Lodges, but then, another bang from the left engine. It had also flamed out due to lack of fuel. The pilots tried to restart it too, but it was also too late. They had lost both engines and all of their electrical power. They were now flying a glider over the Atlantic Ocean. When both engines flamed out, the pilots had to face a dire situation. They had no power, no thrust, and no fuel. They had to glide the aircraft, which weighed over 200 tons, to the nearest airport, which was still far away. They had to deal with many challenges, such as maintaining altitude and speed, communicating with air traffic control, preparing for an emergency landing, and coping with cabin pressure and temperature issues. The first challenge was to maintain altitude and speed. The pilots had to find the best glide ratio for the aircraft, which is the ratio of horizontal distance traveled to vertical distance lost. The best glide ratio for an Airbus A330 is about 15:1, which means that for every 15 kilometers traveled horizontally, the aircraft loses 1 kilometer of altitude. The pilots had to adjust the pitch and angle of attack of the aircraft to achieve this ratio. They also had to avoid stalling or overspeeding the aircraft, which could cause loss of control or structural damage. They used a device called a ram air turbine, which is a small propeller that pops out from the wing and generates enough electricity to power some essential instruments and controls. The second challenge was to communicate with air traffic control. The pilots had no radio contact with ATC because they had lost all electrical power. They had to use a backup battery-powered radio that had a limited range and frequency. They also had to use a code called 7600, which is a transponder signal that indicates a radio failure. The pilots contacted Santa Maria Oceanic Control Center in the Azores, which was responsible for their airspace. They informed them of their situation and requested permission to land at Lodges Airport. They also asked for assistance from other aircraft in the area that could relay their messages and act as escorts. One of these aircraft was a Royal Air Force C-130 Hercules that was flying nearby. The C-130 pilot contacted Flight 236 and offered his help. He also gave them some vital information, such as the weather conditions and runway details at Lodges. The third challenge was to prepare for an emergency landing. The pilots had to calculate their landing distance and speed based on their weight, altitude, and wind. They also had to configure the aircraft for landing without using the normal procedures and systems. They had no flaps or slats, which are devices that extend from the wings and increase lift and drag during landing. They also had no spoilers or reverse thrust, which are devices that reduce lift and increase drag after landing. They also had no anti-skid brakes or steering system, which are devices that prevent skidding and control direction on the ground. They had to use an emergency system called gravity drop, which is a manual release of the landing gear by gravity. They also had to use an emergency system called alternate braking, which is a manual application of hydraulic pressure to the brakes by pumping a pedal. The fourth challenge was to cope with cabin pressure and temperature issues. The passengers and crew had to endure a rapid decompression when both engines failed. They had to use oxygen masks that dropped from the ceiling and fasten their seat belts. They also had to endure a drop in temperature as the aircraft descended from high altitude. The cabin temperature fell from about 24 degrees Celsius to about 10 degrees Celsius. Some passengers reported feeling cold and shivering. The passengers and crew were also in a state of fear and panic as they realized they were in a life-threatening situation. Some prayed, some cried, some hugged each other, some tried to calm down others or make jokes. Some wrote farewell notes or recorded messages on their phones. The pilots tried to reassure them by making announcements over the intercom. They told them what was happening and what they were doing. They also told them to brace for impact when they were about to land. As the aircraft approached Lodges Airport, the pilots had to make a crucial decision, which runway to use. There were two runways available, runway 1533, which was longer but had a tailwind, and runway 0321, which was shorter but had a headwind. The pilots chose runway 33 because they thought that the tailwind would help them glide further and reach the runway. They also thought that the longer runway would give them more margin for error and braking distance. However, this turned out to be a mistake. The tailwind actually reduced their glide ratio and made them lose altitude faster. They also underestimated the strength of the wind, which was about 37 kilometers per hour. They realized their error too late, and they had no time to change their course. They had to land on runway 33 with a tailwind on a dark night with no power, no flaps, no spoilers, no reverse thrust, no anti-skid brakes, and no steering system. They had to make a perfect landing. They aligned the aircraft with the runway and aimed for the threshold. They deployed the landing gear using gravity drop and applied alternate braking by pumping a pedal. They also used differential braking by applying more pressure on one pedal than the other to control direction. They touched down at 6:46 Universal Time Coordinated, at a speed of about 370 kilometers per hour, which was much faster than normal. The landing was hard and fast, and the aircraft bounced several times on the runway. The pilots tried to slow down the aircraft as much as possible by using maximum braking force. They also used the emergency brake handle, which activated a parachute that deployed from the tail of the aircraft. But it was not enough. The aircraft was still going too fast and ran out of runway. It overshot the end of the runway by about 660 feet and came to a stop on a grassy area near a military base. The aircraft burst several tires and damaged its landing gear and hydraulics. It also suffered some minor structural damage and fuel leakage, but miraculously, no one was killed or seriously injured. The passengers and crew evaluated the aircraft using slides and emergency exits. They were met by firefighters and paramedics who arrived at the scene. They were also greeted by local residents who offered them food, water, blankets, and phones. They were taken to a nearby hotel where they received medical attention and psychological support. They were also interviewed by investigators who wanted to know what happened. The next day, they boarded another Air Transat flight that took them to Lisbon, their original destination. Air Transat Flight 236 was a remarkable example of how skillful piloting and teamwork can save lives in a dire situation. The pilots were hailed as heroes and received several awards for their feat, such as the Trans-Canada Trophy, the Superior Airmanship Award, and the Flight Safety Foundation Professionalism Award. The incident also led to changes in maintenance procedures and safety regulations to prevent similar accidents in the future. The cause of the fuel leak was traced to an incorrect installation of a hydraulic pump that damaged the fuel line. Air Transat admitted its responsibility and paid a fine of 250,000 Canadian dollars. The airline also improved its training and supervision of its maintenance staff. The incident also raised awareness about the importance of fuel management and emergency procedures in aviation. It also inspired several documentaries, books, and movies that told the story of Flight 236. What do you think of this amazing story? Let us know in the comments below. And don't forget to like and subscribe for more videos like this.
Hey, thank you for watching, and be sure to subscribe because more incredible content is on the way.